The sun burned low over the azure horizon, the sky bleeding shades of lavender and crimson, as evening descended upon Serenity Haven, a world-class resort sprawling across miles of pristine white sand. Couples lounged in plush cabanas, sipping cocktails under softly swaying palms, basking in the luxury they believed would last forever. Ethan Caldwell adjusted the cufflinks on his crisp linen shirt, his eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses, as he watched his girlfriend Amelia pose for another selfie. Her laughter was light and carefree, just like the wind sweeping through the open-air terrace. She was beautiful, yes, but the sound of her laughter didn't quite reach him. Something else gnawed at the edges of his mind, a cold, hollow space he couldn't fill, no matter how much money he threw at it. "Ethan?" Amelia's voice jolted him from his room. "You're not even looking." He forced a smile, the practiced curve of his lips a reflex by now. "You look great, Mel." Her pout vanished, replaced by a radiant grin. She slipped her arm through his. "Let's go inside. The chef's special tonight is supposed to be divine." "Sure." As they stepped into the grand lobby, a wave of cool air enveloped them. Marble floors gleamed beneath a chandelier that dripped crystal droplets, each one worth more than some people made in a year. It should have felt like home. Instead, Ethan felt like a guest in his own life. Then he saw her. She was bent over near the grand piano, her slender hands working diligently as she wiped away smudges of fingerprints left by careless tourists. Her hair, once a cascade of golden waves, was tied in a messy bun. Loose strands framed a face that was both familiar and foreign, thinner, more exhausted. A faded uniform clung to her frame, and her stomach, round and heavy with child, strained against the fabric. His child, Sophia. Ethan's world tilted, a rush of heat flooding his veins. His fists clenched involuntarily as a storm of emotions surged through him. Rage, guilt, confusion. How could she be here? Why was she here? He took a step forward, his voice low and taut. "Sophia." She froze, the rag slipping from her fingers. Slowly she straightened and turned to face him. Her eyes, once bright and unyielding, were now weary, shadows pooling beneath them. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. A tense silence settled between them, the weight of their shared past pressing down on both like a lead blanket. The noise of the resort faded into the background. There was only the space between them, a chasm carved by choices they could never take back. Amelia's voice shattered the silence. "Ethan, who's this?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Sophia's eyes flicked to Amelia, then back to Ethan. A bitter smile curled her lips. "You don't need to explain. I get it." Her words stung. He stepped closer, his jaw tight. "What are you doing here, Sam?" She lifted her chin, defiance flickering through the exhaustion. "I'm working, just like everyone else." "You're pregnant." His voice rose, raw and unfiltered. "You shouldn't be doing this. Why didn't you—" "Call you," she cut in, her eyes blazing now. "Ask for help? After the way you left things?" His stomach twisted. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The walls of his perfectly ordered life seemed to crumble with every second he spent looking into her eyes. Amelia's hand was on his arm, her voice tinged with impatience. "Ethan, let's just go." "This is awkward." Sophia turned away, kneeling to pick up the rag. "Yeah, Ethan, you should go." A muscle twitched in his jaw. Every cell in his body screamed to stay, to demand answers, to fix this. But pride was a cruel master. He let Amelia pull him away, each step feeling like a betrayal he couldn't stop committing. But as they moved toward the restaurant, Ethan couldn't shake the image of Sophia, the woman he once loved more than life, scrubbing floors to survive, carrying his child. And then he knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Ethan realizes he can't ignore Sophia's situation. He decides to confront her, but what he discovers will shake him to his core. Ethan's steak sat untouched, the juices pooling on the porcelain plate, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Across the candlelit table, Amelia scrolled through her phone, oblivious to his distracted silence. The flicker of the flame cast long shadows over his features, accentuating the storm brewing behind his eyes. His mind was a labyrinth of questions he couldn't answer. How had Sophia ended up here, cleaning floors at a luxury resort? Why hadn't she reached out to him even once? And more importantly, why did the sight of her, pregnant and working herself to the bone, make him feel like the ground was slipping away beneath his feet? Ethan? Amelia's voice was laced with irritation. Are you even listening to me? He looked up, forcing his expression into a semblance of calm. Yeah, sorry. What were you saying? She sighed, her manicured fingers tapping the stem of her wineglass. I was saying we should book that yacht trip for next month. The Maldives would be perfect this time of year. The Maldives, another trip to another paradise, another attempt to drown out the hollowness inside him with luxury and distraction. The thought made his stomach churn. Let's talk about it later, he muttered, pushing his chair back. I need some air. Before she could protest, he was on his feet, striding away from the table, the murmur of the other diners fading into background noise. His heart pounded in his chest as he headed back to the lobby, his thoughts a tangled mess. He needed to see her again, to understand, to fix something. The grand lobby was quieter now, the evening crowd filtering toward dinner or the beachside bars. But Sophia was still there, her movements methodical as she wiped down the reception desk. Ethan paused in the shadows, watching her. Each gesture, each sigh seemed to speak volumes about the weight she carried alone. You did this to her, the thought struck like a hammer to his chest. Summoning his courage, he stepped forward. Sophia. She didn't flinch this time. Her shoulders squared as she turned to face him. The defiance in her eyes clashed with the vulnerability etched into her face. What do you want, Ethan? Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, honed by months of struggle. He took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. I need to know what happened, why you're here, why you didn't ask for your help. She finished for him, folding her arms over her chest. Because I'm not your charity case, Ethan. You made your choice. I made mine. His jaw clenched. You think I chose this? To see you like this? She laughed, a bitter sound that made his heart ache. You walked away, and you didn't look back. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died on his tongue. She was right. He had walked away, drowning in his pride and anger, convinced that distance was the only way to preserve what was left of his sanity. But now, faced with the consequences of that choice, the regret was suffocating. Sam, he whispered, the rawness in his voice betraying him. I didn't know. I didn't know you were pregnant. She swallowed hard, her gaze flicking away. Would it have changed anything if you did? Yes, he said fiercely. It would have. Her eyes snapped back to his, searching for a lie in his face. Well, now you know. And it changes nothing. He stepped closer, his hands curling into fists at his sides. It changes everything. You're carrying my child. I have a right to... To what? She shot back. To waltz back into my life and play the hero? Where were you when I was alone in that empty apartment, trying to figure out how to survive? The pain in her voice cut deeper than any blade. He staggered back a step, guilt twisting like a knife in his gut. I didn't know, he repeated, his voice barely audible. Her shoulders sagged, the fight bleeding out of her. It doesn't matter anymore. I'm doing what I have to do. His eyes dropped to her rounded belly, a silent testament to the life they had created together. A life he hadn't even known existed until tonight. The weight of it was almost too much to bear. Let me help you, he said, desperation creeping into his tone. Please. She shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. I don't want your pity, Ethan. I just want to be left alone. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. Before he could say another word, a sharp voice interrupted them. Sophia, why are you standing around? There are rooms that need cleaning. They both turned to see a middle-aged man in a cheap suit glaring at Sophia. Her boss, Ethan realized, his lips curling in disgust. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, she said quietly. Already moving past Ethan, her shoulders hunched. The man's gaze shifted to Ethan, narrowing with suspicion. Who are you? Ethan's voice was cold as ice. Someone who doesn't appreciate seeing a pregnant woman treated like garbage. Mr. Carter sneered. She's an employee. If she can't do the work, she shouldn't be here. A white-hot fury surged through Ethan. His jaw tightened, his hands trembling with the effort to keep his anger in check. "You're going to regret saying that," Carter laughed, dismissing him with a wave. "I doubt it." Ethan's eyes burned as he watched Sophia disappear down the hall, her figure small and fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights. This wasn't over. He would make sure of it. Ethan decides to use his influence to change Sophia's circumstances, but in doing so, he may uncover truths that neither of them are ready to face. Ethan's polished dress shoes clacked against the resort's marble floors, his pace relentless. The fury simmering beneath his calm exterior threatened to boil over, but he channeled it, each step taking him closer to a solution. He was done standing on the sidelines while Sophia suffered. The sleek door to the manager's office loomed ahead. He didn't bother knocking. He pushed it open, startling a wiry man hunched over spreadsheets. "Mr. Caldwell." The manager, Michael Jensen, straightened hastily, his eyes wide with a mix of surprise and awe. "I wasn't expecting you." Ethan's voice was steel. "We need to talk about Sophia." Jensen blinked. "Sophia? One of the cleaners." "She's not just a cleaner," Ethan snapped, his control slipping. "She's pregnant, and I want to know why she's working herself to exhaustion while you stand by and watch." Jensen cleared his throat nervously. She insisted, Mr. Caldwell. We offered lighter duties, but she refused. Said she needed the hours." Ethan's jaw clenched. That sounded like Sophia, stubborn to the end, refusing to accept any form of pity or special treatment. But this wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival, about their child. "I want her off the cleaning crew," Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. "Find her something else, something that won't jeopardize her health." Jensen nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell. I'll make the arrangements right away." Ethan turned to leave, but Jensen's hesitant voice stopped him. "Sir, I don't mean to pry, but what's your connection to Sophia?" Ethan's eyes flashed. "That's none of your business." Without another word, he strode out, the door snapping shut behind him. Later that evening, Ethan waited in the shadows of the employee entrance, the cool night air biting at his skin. He checked his watch, 9:05 p.m. The shift change. He knew she'd be out soon. The door creaked open, and Sophia stepped out, her uniform wrinkled, her face pale with exhaustion. She hugged her coat around her, the fabric barely concealing her rounded belly. "Sophia." She froze, her breath catching. "Ethan," she said, her voice weary. "What are you doing here?" "I talked to the manager," he said gently. "You don't have to clean rooms anymore. They're going to reassign you." Her eyes narrowed, a flash of anger breaking through the exhaustion. "You did what?" "I'm trying to help you." His voice rose, frustration bleeding through. "You shouldn't be working like this. You're pregnant," she snapped. "I know. Believe me, I know." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "You don't have to do this alone, Sam. Let me be there for you, for the baby." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It's too late for that, Ethan." "It's not." His voice cracked. "Please let me try." She stared at him, her expression torn. For a moment he saw the vulnerability beneath the armor, the fear, the loneliness. But then just as quickly it was gone. "I don't need your charity," she whispered. "I just need you to let me go." He reached for her, but she stepped back, the distance between them growing impossibly wide. "Goodbye, Ethan." She turned and walked away, her figure dissolving into the night. Ethan stood there, the cold seeping into his bones. He felt like he was losing her all over again. No, not this time. He wasn't giving up. Not on her, not on their child. The next morning, Ethan sat in his suite, his laptop open on the mahogany desk. He scrolled through a series of emails, each one a thread in the tapestry of his plan. If Sophia wouldn't accept his help directly, he'd find another way. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He glanced up as Amelia sauntered in, her expression curious. "You missed breakfast," she said, pouting. "What are you doing?" "Work," he replied curtly. She rolled her eyes. "You're always working." "Not now, Amelia." She folded her arms, her gaze sharpening. "This is about her, isn't it? The cleaning lady." He didn't answer, his silence speaking volumes. She laughed bitterly. Unbelievable. You're still hung up on your ex, even after everything. Maybe because everything isn't as simple as you think. He shot back, his patience wearing thin. She shook her head, her eyes cold. You know what, Ethan? I'm done. I didn't sign up for this drama. Fine, he said, his voice flat. Go? She stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, to apologize. But he didn't. With a scoff, she turned on her heel and slammed the door behind her. Ethan exhaled slowly. One less complication, one step closer to fixing the mess he'd made. That afternoon, he found Sophia by the beach, her feet sinking into the wet sand as she stared at the waves. The wind tousled her hair, and for a moment she looked like the woman he'd fallen in love with, strong, fearless, beautiful. He approached slowly, his heart pounding. Sam. She didn't look at him. You don't give up, do you? Not when it matters, she sighed. Why are you doing this? Because I still care, he said softly, and because I made a mistake. I let my pride destroy us. I don't want to make that mistake again. She turned to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. I don't know if I can trust you, Ethan. Then let me prove it to you. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. For a long moment she hesitated. Then slowly she placed her hand in his. A flicker of hope ignited in his chest. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a start. And sometimes a start was enough. Just as Ethan believes things might be turning around, a secret from Sophia's past emerges, threatening to destroy everything they're rebuilding. The sun was setting over Serenity Haven as golden light poured through the panoramic windows of Ethan's suite. He stood by the glass, his reflection staring back at him. A man who seemed to have everything but felt as though he had nothing. His phone buzzed on the desk behind him. He turned and saw a message flashing across the screen. We need to talk. Meet me by the old pier at 7 p.m., say. Sophia. His heart jolted. After days of tension, arguments, and futile attempts to help her, had she finally decided to let him in? He didn't hesitate. Grabbing his keys, he walked out the door, a sliver of hope propelling him forward. The old pier jutted out into the ocean, weathered wood creaking underfoot. The resort's luxury seemed miles away here, replaced by the scent of salt and the crash of waves. Sophia stood at the edge, her figure silhouetted against the dying light. Her hair was down, golden strands dancing in the breeze. She didn't turn as he approached. He stopped a few steps behind her, giving her space. How you came, she said softly, her voice barely audible over the surf. I'll always come when you call, he replied. A sad smile flickered across her face. That's what I used to believe. His chest tightened. Sam, I know I can't undo the past, but I want to be here now. For you. For the baby. She turned to face him, her eyes glistening with tears. You keep saying that, but what if it's too late? It's not. He stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. We still have a chance. We can try again. She shook her head. It's not just about us anymore, Ethan. There's more at stake. He frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the pier's worn planks. There's something I haven't told you. His stomach nodded. What is it? She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. The baby. There's a complication. The doctors say there's a chance he might not make it, and even if he does, he could have serious health problems. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He staggered, the world tilting around him. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't want your pity, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't want you to feel trapped. He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. This isn't pity, Sam. This is love. And it's not just your burden to carry. It's ours. Her eyes searched his face, looking for cracks in his resolve. But he held her gaze, letting her see the raw, unfiltered truth. We'll face it together, he said. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. A sob broke free from her lips, and she collapsed against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her as the waves crashed around them. For the first time in months, the walls between them crumbled. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Ethan moved Sophia into his suite, ensuring she had everything she needed. He took her to the best doctors, sparing no expense. But even with all his wealth, there were no guarantees. The future was a fragile thread, stretched thin, but they faced it together. One afternoon, as Sophia rested on the balcony, Ethan sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her belly. He felt a soft kick against his palm, and a smile tugged at his lips. "He's strong," he whispered. She nodded, her eyes soft like his father. He looked at her, emotion welling in his chest. And his mother. Their fingers intertwined, a silent promise passing between them. A week later, Ethan received an urgent call while reviewing contracts in the suite. "Mr. Caldwell, it's time," the nurse said. His heart leapt into his throat. He grabbed his coat and rushed to the resort clinic where Sophia had been taken. Fear and excitement warred within him. When he burst through the doors, he found Sophia on a hospital bed, sweat beading her forehead, her face contorted with effort. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Ethan," he rushed to her side, taking her hand. "I'm here. You're not alone." Her grip tightened, and she nodded. "Let's meet our son." Hours passed in a blur of pain, encouragement, and prayers. Finally, a sharp cry pierced the air. Ethan's breath caught as the doctor held up a tiny, squirming infant. "Congratulations," the doctor said. "You have a son." Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he looked at the tiny miracle wrapped in a soft blanket. The baby's eyes fluttered open, and he let out a soft sigh, his delicate fingers curling around Ethan's thumb. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered. Sophia smiled, exhausted but radiant. "We did it." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You did it. I'm so proud of you." They both stared at their son, the weight of the past lifting, as hope filled the space it left behind. A month later, they stood on the beach, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Ethan cradled their son in his arms, the gentle sound of waves a soothing backdrop. Sophia leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we can do this?" she asked softly. He looked at her, then at their son, who slept peacefully in his arms. "I know we can." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Then let's do it together." As the last rays of sunlight faded, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were no longer walking it alone, and that was enough. Sometimes love wasn't about perfect endings. It was about holding on through the storms, rebuilding what was broken, and finding beauty in the pieces that remained. This story follows the emotional journey of Ethan Caldwell as he seeks redemption and reconnects with Sophia, the mother of his unborn child. Through past misunderstandings, pain, and regret, they learn to face the truth and overcome challenges together to protect their shared future. The core message lies in this: love is not about perfection, but about persistence, compassion, and rebuilding what is broken. Sometimes the greatest challenges offer the opportunity to rediscover oneself and the true values of life. Did you enjoy this heartfelt story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on the lessons from this tale. Don't forget to hit like to support this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this.